The orbital platform hung above the planet like a metal moon, and inside its steel hulls, the greatest warriors of the Galactic Coalition prepared for war. Sergeant Kale Morrow stepped off the transport shuttle and felt every. I turned toward him. He was used to it by now. The Torvashian stood 8 feet tall with scales that could stop a blade and muscles that could crush bone with a casual grip. The Crow were walking fortresses, their bodies covered in natural armor plates that made them look like living tanks. And then there was Morrow, 5 feet and 10 inches of soft pink skin and fragile bone. He walked through the staging area with his gear bag over his shoulder. And the whispers started immediately. Is that the human? A Torvashian muttered to his squad mate. It must be some kind of joke. The other replied. Morrow found his assigned quarters and dropped his bag on the bunk. The bed was too large for him, built for species twice his size. But he had slept in worse places. He had slept in mud and snow and burning sand. A metal bunk was luxury. The door opened behind him, and a massive shadow filled the frame. Commander Veteran of the 47th Assault Division stood there with his arms crossed over his scaled chest. His yellow eyes looked Morrow up and down, like a predator examining something that was not worth eating. You are the human soldier, Veteran said. It was not a question. Sergeant Kale Morrow. Reporting as assigned, Morrow replied. I requested experienced warriors for this mission. Veteran continued, his voice cold as ice. Instead, they sent me a member of a species that has been in the Coalition for less than 5 cycles. I go where I am ordered. Commander. Veteran stepped closer, and Morrow had to tilt his head back to meet those predator eyes. Your species is soft, Veteran said. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no regeneration. And your homeworld has light gravity that makes your bones weak. We manage. Morrow said, we shall see. The commander turned and walked away, and Morrow let out a slow breath. He had faced worse than alien contempt. He had faced things that would make these warriors weep. The briefing room was packed with the elite soldiers of the 47th Division. Morrow took a position at the back, and he felt the stares and heard the low laughter. A Krull heavy gunner named Torka turned to look at him with 4 small eyes set in a face of gray armor plate. Human, Torka said in a voice like grinding stone. I have a wager with my squad that you will not survive the first hour of combat. What are the odds? Morrow asked. 12 to 1 against you. Generous. The briefing began, and Commander Veteran outlined the mission. The target was a Dominion research facility on the planet Varth 7. Intelligence suggested the enemy was developing a new bioweapon, something that could kill entire populations in days. The squad would infiltrate the facility, extract data on the weapon, and eliminate the scientists responsible. Standard infiltration protocol, Veteran said. We drop at midnight local time and move through the jungle to the facility perimeter. And from there we breach and complete our objectives. He looked around the room at his warriors. Estimated mission duration is 12 hours. Morrow studied the holographic map of the planet. The jungle was dense and filled with hostile life forms. The facility was heavily guarded with automated defenses and at least 200 Dominion soldiers. 12 hours seemed optimistic. Questions? Veteran asked. The Vectory patrol patterns, Morrow said, and every head turned toward him. What is the rotation schedule? Veteran's eyes narrowed. You have access to the mission files, human, and you should read them before asking basic questions. I did read them, Morrow said. The files show patrol routes but not timing intervals. And without that information, we cannot predict gaps in their coverage. The room went quiet. Veteran stared at Morrow for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. It was not respect, not yet, but it was something close to surprise. The timing intervals vary, Veteran admitted. We will have to adapt on the ground. Understood. The briefing continued, and Morrow memorized every detail. He noted the terrain features, the elevation changes, the water sources, and the positions of enemy strong points. When the other warriors left to prepare their weapons, Morrow stayed behind to study the map. Lieutenant Torka paused at the door. "You take this seriously," the Krell observed. "I take survival seriously." Morrow said, "Your species does not look built for survival." Morrow turned to face the massive alien. "My species has been surviving for 300,000 years, he said. "We survived ice ages that killed 90% of all life on our world. And we survived predators with claws and fangs and venom, and we survived each other." He picked up his gear and walked toward the door. "We are very good at surviving." The dropship launched at midnight, and the squad sat in silence as it descended through the atmosphere of Vara 7. Morrow checked his equipment one final time. Coalition standard rifle, fully charged combat knife, sharpened to a razor-edge medical kit, water purification tablets, emergency rations, and a few items he had brought from Earth that the quartermaster had not questioned. The Tovashans around him were cleaning their claws and checking their heavy weapons. The Krell were running diagnostics on their armor systems. Nobody looked at Morrow. He was beneath their notice, a curiosity that would soon be a casualty. The dropship shuddered as it hit turbulence, and red light filled the cabin. 2 minutes to landing zone. The pilot announced. Commander Veteran stood and addressed his warriors. "We move fast, and we move quiet," he said. "No unnecessary contact with enemy forces until we reach the facility, and anyone who compromises the mission will answer to me." The warriors nodded and growled their acknowledgement. Morrow said nothing. The ship touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering fungal trees that glowed with pale blue light. The air was thick and hot and smelled of decay. One by one, the warriors exited the ship and fanned out into the jungle. Morrow was the jungle. Morrow was the last to leave. He paused at the edge of the clearing and looked up at the alien sky. And for a moment he thought about home. Earth was far away, a small blue world that these aliens considered insignificant. But Earth had made him. Earth had forged humanity in fire and ice and blood, and now he would show them what that meant. Human. Veteran called from the jungle. "Move or be left behind." Morrow smiled in the darkness. 12 hours seems generous," he said quietly. Then he stepped into the jungle and disappeared among the shadows. The mission had begun. The jungle of Vara 7 was trying to kill them. Clouds of glowing spores drifted through the air like poisoned snow, and each breath brought the risk of infection. The rain that fell from the canopy was not water, but acid that burned through armor and flesh with equal hunger. Giant plants with teeth lurked in the shadows, waiting for anything foolish enough to step too close. The Torvashans moved through this nightmare with genetic confidence. Their scales shrugged off the acid, and their lungs filtered the spores. The Krell were even more resilient, their armored bodies ignoring hazards that would cripple lesser species. Morrow had none of these advantages, but he had something else. He had preparation. The other warriors noticed it slowly. At first, the human had wrapped his gear in a thin material that shed the acid rain like it was nothing. He moved through the spore clouds by watching the air currents and timing his breathing to avoid the densest concentrations. When they reached a field of carnivorous plants, Morrow tossed a small device ahead of them that emitted a frequency that made the plants curl away from their path. "Where did you get that?" Lieutenant Torka asked. "I made it," Morrow said. "The mission files included the local biology reports." "You read the biology reports?" "I read everything." Commander Vethran watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. The human was not supposed to be competent. The human was supposed to be a burden, a political requirement that High Command had forced upon him. but the human was keeping pace with warriors twice his size. And he had not complained once about the conditions that were slowly eating through even Torvashian scales. They moved deeper into the jungle, and the bioluminescent glow of the plants grew brighter. The facility was still 3 hours away at their current pace. Morrow felt them. Before he saw them, it was a skill he had learned long ago. In jungles on Earth that were just as deadly as this one, the slight change in the air, the way the local creatures went silent, the faint vibration of footsteps that did not belong contact. He whispered the word had barely left his mouth when the jungle exploded with plasma fire Vectory scouts. 6 of them burst from the undergrowth with weapons blazing. The insectoid aliens were fast and vicious, their compound eyes tracking multiple targets at once while their forearms wielded guns and blades simultaneously. The coalition warriors responded with brutal efficiency. The Torvashians opened fire with heavy rifles that punched through Vectory armor like it was paper. The Krell charged forward and crushed one scout under their massive feet. Morrow dropped to one knee and took careful aim. His bullets rifle barked twice, and 2 Vectory fell with holes burned through their heads. The firefight lasted less than a minute when it was over. 3 Vectory lay dead in the undergrowth, but 3 were missing. They ran, Vethran snarled. They will alert the facility, and our approach is compromised. The warriors cursed in a dozen languages. A quiet approach was now impossible, and the enemy would be waiting for them with every weapon they had. Morrow was already moving. Human, where are you going? Vethran demanded. To fix this, before anyone could stop him, Morrow vanished into the jungle like smoke. The warriors stared at the spot where he had been. Should we follow him? One of the Torvashians asked. Let him go, Vethran said. He will either succeed or die, and either outcome is acceptable. They waited. The jungle pressed in around them with its glowing spores and its hungry plants. Time stretched like a wound. 15 minutes passed, and there was no sign of the human. He is dead, Torka said. No species could track Vectory scouts through this terrain. Perhaps, Vethran said, but there was doubt in his voice now. 20 minutes, the warriors grew restless. Some checked their weapons while others scanned the jungle for threats. They were exposed here, and every moment increased the danger. And then Morrow returned. He emerged from the shadows, dragging 3 Vectory corpses behind him. One in each hand and one over his shoulder. He dropped them at Vethran's feet and stood there breathing hard. His armor was covered in ichor. The green blood of the Vectory, some of the blood was red. His own. The warriors stared at the bodies. The first Vectory had its throat cut so deeply that the head was nearly severed. The second had a broken neck. The exoskeleton cracked and twisted at an impossible angle. The third was strangled with its own communication wire. The cord wrapped so tight that it had cut into the alien flesh. How? Torka asked. The word came out as a whisper. They were fast, Morrow said, wiping ichor from his combat knife. But they were not quiet. And I followed the trail they left. You killed 3 Vectory scouts in close combat, Vethran said slowly. Without claws, without fangs, without them, and without armor. I have hands. Morrow held up his hands. Those soft pink appendages that the aliens had mocked since his arrival. 10 fingers with no claws, palms with no natural weapons. And yet, those hands had killed 3 elite enemy soldiers in the dark. Hands. Torka repeated. Humans are tool users, Morrow said. Everything is a tool. And everything is a weapon. He bent down and retrieved something from one of the Vectory corpses. It was a data chip, pulled from the scouts' communication device. Their patrol route and schedule, Morrow said, handing it to Vethran. We now know exactly where every enemy soldier will be for the next 6 hours. Vethran took the chip and stared at it. Then he looked at Morrow. really looked at him. For the first time, the human was small and soft and breakable, but there was something in those alien eyes that Vethran recognized. It was the look of a predator, not the explosive violence of a Torvashan or the crushing power of a Krull. This was something older and stranger. This was patience. This was endurance. This was the certainty of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its food chain, not through strength, but through sheer relentless will we move, Vethran said finally. The human takes point. The warriors exchanged glances. No one argued. They followed Morrow into the jungle. And for the first time, they watched him with something other than contempt. The Torvashan walking beside Torka leaned close and whispered, "What kind of world produces something like that?" Torka remembered what little he knew about Earth. A world of extremes, of burning deserts and frozen wastelands, of oceans that swallowed ships and mountains that touched the sky. A world where everything was trying to kill you, and the only response was to kill it first. A dangerous one. Torka replied ahead of them. Morrow moved through the alien jungle like he had been born there. And somewhere in the distance, the Dominion facility waited. They had no idea what was coming for them. Everything fell apart at the facility perimeter. The stolen patrol data had gotten them close. But not close enough. A secondary patrol, one that was not in the schedules, stumbled across their position just as they prepared to breach the outer fence. Plasma fire erupted from 3 directions at once, automated. Turrets emerged from hidden bunkers and added their deadly chorus to the chaos. The squad was pinned down in a shallow depression with no cover and no escape. "Return fire!" Vethran roared. The Torvashans unleashed their heavy weapons while the Krull provided what cover they could with their armored bodies. But it was not enough. 2 Torvashans fell in the first minute. Their scales no match for concentrated turret fire. Krull took a plasma bolt to the chest and collapsed with smoke pouring from the wound. "We need extraction!" Someone screamed. Vethran grabbed his communicator and called for the dropship. The response was cold and final. "Extraction window opens in 6 hours. And we cannot approach until the anti-air defenses are neutralized." 6 hours. They had to survive 6 hours in this killing field. The warriors dug in and made peace with their deaths. This was how soldiers of the coalition fell, fighting against impossible odds, taking as many enemies with them as they could. Morrow was not making peace with anything. He lay flat in the dirt, studying the enemy positions with eyes that missed nothing. 3 turrets, automated, with overlapping fields of fire. 2 squads of Dominion regulars. Maybe 20 soldiers, total sensor grids along the perimeter that would detect any approach. The math was bad, but Morrow had faced bad math before. He started moving, not backward toward safety, not forward toward the enemy guns. He moved sideways, circling around the edge of the engagement like a shark in dark water. "Morrow!" Vethran shouted. "Where are you going?" But the human was already gone. The first hour passed in blood and fire. The squad held their position through sheer determination. But they were running low on ammunition, and their wounded were getting worse. Then something strange happened. One of the turrets stopped firing. The warriors looked up in confusion. The turret was not destroyed. It was simply dark, its power cut by some invisible hand. What happened? Torka asked. Nobody had an answer. 20 minutes later, the second turret went silent. A Dominion patrol was sent to investigate. 5 soldiers moving toward the disabled weapons. They never came back. Vethran listened to the enemy communications. On his captured frequency scanner, the Dominion commanders were confused and afraid. Something was moving through their perimeter. Something was killing their soldiers, and they could not find it. The third turret exploded in a ball of fire, and with it went the last of the automated defenses. The enemy soldiers began to panic. They pulled troops from the siege line to search for the invisible threat. They sent squads into the jungle that disappeared without a trace. They called for reinforcements that never arrived because someone had sabotaged the communication relay 4 hours into the siege. The pressure on the squad had dropped to almost nothing. The Dominion was too busy hunting a ghost to maintain their assault. Morrow returned just before dawn. He emerged from the jungle like a creature from a nightmare. His armor was burned and torn. His face was covered in soot and blood, some green and some red. He was limping badly, and his left arm hung at an angle that suggested broken bones. But he was alive, and he was carrying something. "Facility access codes," he said, dropping a datapad at Vethran's feet, and a complete map of the interior layout. The warriors stared at him. "How?" Vethran asked. It was the same question Torka had asked in the jungle, but this time it carried a different weight. "I kept moving," Morrow said. He sat down heavily against a rock and began treating his wounds with one hand. "Humans have a word for how we fight wars," he continued. "We call it attrition. I do not know this word," Torka said. "It means we make the enemy pay for every inch of ground," Morrow said. "We do not try to win a single battle, and we do not expect victory to come quickly. We just keep fighting until the enemy breaks or until we do." He looked up at the massive Krell with eyes that had seen too much. "And we do not break easily." Vethran studied the human soldier with new understanding. The Tervashans won battles through overwhelming force. The Krell won through unstoppable defense. But humans, these small soft creatures from their little blue world, won through something else entirely. They won by refusing to stop. They won by fighting when any sane species would retreat. They won by treating their own bodies as weapons to be spent in pursuit of victory. "Your injuries," Vethran said. "They should have killed you." "Probably," Morrow agreed. "Why did you not fall?" Morrow thought about the question. He thought about the history of his species, the endless wars and famines and disasters that had forged humanity into what it was. He thought about his training, the brutal years of learning to push past pain and fear and exhaustion. He thought about the simple truth that had kept him moving through that long night, because the mission was not complete, he said finally. The sun rose over Vareth 7 and painted the jungle in shades of gold and green. The siege was broken. The path to the facility was open, and the warriors of the 47th Division looked at their human soldier with something that was no longer contempt. It was respect, and underneath that respect, buried deep where warriors do not like to look, there was fear, because they understood now what humanity was. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. They were not the toughest, but they were the ones who never stopped coming. And that was far more terrifying than any claw or fang or armor. "The perimeter is soft now," Morrow said, climbing to his feet despite his wounds. "We should move." Vethran nodded and rallied his surviving warriors. They had a facility to destroy, and they had a human to follow into hell. The facility doors blew inward, and the squad poured through the breach. Whatever resistance they expected was a shadow of what should have been Morrow's night of terror had pulled most of the defenders away from their posts, and those who remained were jumpy and frightened. They died quickly. The squad moved through sterile white corridors that smelled of chemicals and fear. Emergency lights flickered overhead and alarms wailed in the distance. They were making good progress until they found the first laboratory. Vethran stopped in the doorway, and his scales went pale. By the stars, he whispered. The room was filled with tanks, dozens of them, and inside each tank floated something that had once been a person coalition species. All of them Tervashans, with their scales falling off in rotting sheets. Krell with their armor plates dissolving into gray sludge. Smaller species twisted into shapes that no living thing should. The bioweapon was not theoretical. It was real, and it was ready. They were going to release this. Torka said, his deep voice breaking. Entire worlds would fall. Morrow walked among the tanks with cold eyes. He had seen horror before. Earth had produced plenty of its own nightmares. And humans had inflicted terrible things upon each other throughout their history. But this was different. This was extinction made into a science. We cannot just extract the data, Vethran said. We have to destroy everything. The reactor core, Morrow said, pointing to the facility map on his stolen datapad. If we overload it, the explosion will vaporize the entire complex. The core is in the center of the facility, Vethran replied. Behind the main security hub. He pulled up the tactical display and his expression darkened. The hub is defended by a full complement of Dominion elites. Elites were the Vectory warrior caste. Born and bred for combat. Each one was worth 10 regular soldiers. And the display showed at least a dozen of them guarding the approach to the core. The squad was down to 7 warriors. All of them wounded and exhausted. We pushed through, Vethran said. No other option. They fought their way deeper into the facility. Every corridor brought new enemies and new casualties. A Tervashian fell holding a choke point so the others could advance. A Krell sacrificed himself to absorb a grenade blast that would have killed half the squad. By the time they reached the security hub, only 3 of them remained Commander Vethran. Wounded in 6 places, but still standing Lieutenant Torka. His armor cracked and his ammunition nearly gone, and Sergeant Kale Morrow, who should have been dead 10 times over, but refused to acknowledge it. The security hub was a massive room filled with computer terminals and tactical displays. Standing in the center was a Dominion commander. A Vectory lord in gilded armor with ceremonial blades crossed over his back. Around him stood 12 elites in full combat gear, their compound eyes tracking the 3 intruders with murderous intent. 3 survivors, the Dominion commander said, his voice a rasping click. I expected more from the famous coalition warriors. You expected wrong about a lot of things, Vethran replied. The commander's eyes focused on Morrow. A human, he said with something like amusement. I have heard of your species, and I was told you were soft and weak. You were told correctly, Morrow said. He stepped forward, putting himself between his squad and the enemy. What are you doing? Vethran hissed. Getting you to the core, Morrow said. When I engage, you run. That is suicide. Morrow looked back at his commander with eyes that held no fear. My species survived an ice age by running prey to death, he said. We hunted animals 10 times their size by following them until their hearts gave out. And we domesticated wolves because we saw something of ourselves in their hunger. He turned back to face the elites. We invented cruelty as a science and mercy as a philosophy. And we have been killing each other for 100,000 years. And the only reason we stopped is because we found other things to kill. He raised his rifle. 12 seems manageable. Morrow charged. The elites opened fire, but Morrow was already moving, his body a blur of desperate motion. He fired as he ran, not aiming for kills, but for disruption, making the enemy scatter and seek cover. He reached the first elite and dropped his empty rifle, drawing his combat knife in the same motion. The blade found the gap in the elite's armor and punched through the soft tissue beneath. The elite screamed and fell. And Morrow was already moving to the next target. Vethran and Torka ran for the door on the far side of the room. Plasma bolts screamed past them, but they did not stop behind them. Morrow was dancing with death. He killed the second elite with a strike to the throat that crushed the windpipe. The third he tackled to the ground and beat to death with his bare hands. The fourth managed to wound him, a blade slicing across his stomach. But Morrow barely slowed down. He grabbed the elite's arm and used its own weapon to kill it, then spun and threw the blade into the 5th elite's eye. The Dominion commander watched in disbelief as his warriors fell one by one. This human, this small, soft creature, was cutting through his best soldiers like they were nothing. Kill it. He screamed, kill it now. The remaining elites converged on Morrow from all directions. He took wounds that would have dropped any other species. A blade to the leg, a shot to the shoulder, claws that raked across his back and exposed the muscle beneath. But he did not fall. He fought with everything he had, using tricks and techniques refined over millennia of human conflict. He used the environment as a weapon. Slamming one elite's head into a computer terminal, he used their own bodies against them, pulling one into the path of another's blade. He fought with broken bones and torn flesh and blood loss that should have rendered him unconscious, and still he did not fall. Veteran and Torka reached the door and paused to look back. Morrow was surrounded by bodies. 7 elites lay dead around him, and he was fighting the remaining 5 with nothing but his broken knife and his bleeding hands. We have to help him, Torka said. He told us to run, Veteran replied, but his feet would not move. He watched the human fight, and he understood something that changed everything he believed about warfare. Strength could be overcome. Speed could be matched. Armor could be penetrated. But will, pure and absolute and unbreaking, that was something else entirely. That was something terrifying. Go, Morrow screamed. Finish the mission. The commander was advancing now, with both ceremonial blades drawn, and Morrow was running out of elites to hide behind. Veteran made his choice. He grabbed Torka and pulled him through the door. They had a reactor to overload, and they had a human sacrifice to honor behind them. The sounds of combat continued, screaming and crashing, and the wet sounds of violence. Then silence. Then the sound started again. Morrow was not finished yet. The reactor core was exactly where the map said it would be. Veteran and Torka worked quickly, their claws flying over controls designed for vectory hands. The overload sequence took 90 seconds to initiate, and when the countdown began, they had 15 minutes to escape, 15 minutes to run through a facility that was falling apart around them, 15 minutes to reach the extraction point before everything became fire. They ran, the corridors blurred past them as alarms screamed overhead. Dominion soldiers who saw them coming fled rather than fight, because word had spread through the facility. Something terrible had happened in the security hub, something that had broken the elites. Veteran and Torka reached the hub and stopped. The room was a slaughterhouse. 12 elite corpses lay scattered across the floor in various states of destruction. One had been beaten so badly that its exoskeleton had shattered into pieces. One had been killed with its own severed limb, the chitin arm driven through its chest like a spear. One was pinned to the wall by a metal shard through its throat, and its compound eyes were still moving, still alive, still terrified. The Dominion commander hung from a power conduit by his own ceremonial sash. He was very much dead and sitting against the far wall. Surrounded by carnage was Sergeant Cale Morrow. He was holding his stomach together with one hand. His other hand was missing 3 fingers. His face was a mask of blood, and his breathing came in wet rattles that suggested punctured lungs. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Veteran and Torka, he smiled. "Took you long enough," he said. The words came out as a wheeze. Veteran crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the human. "You are alive," he said. "Barely," Morrow agreed. "Did you set the overload?" "Yes, and we have 12 minutes to reach extraction. Then we should probably go." Torka lifted Morrow like he weighed nothing, cradling the human against his armored chest. They ran. The facility was collapsing around them as the reactor began its final countdown. Fires broke out in every corridor, and the ceiling rained debris. Dominion soldiers scrambled for escape routes that no longer existed. Vethran led the way, his rifle cutting down anyone foolish enough to block their path. They burst through the main entrance with 3 minutes to spare and sprinted across the jungle toward the extraction point. The dropship was waiting, its engines already hot. They threw themselves aboard, and the pilot lifted off before the door was even closed behind them. The Dominion facility vanished in a column of white fire that rose into the sky like the anger of a god. The bioweapon was destroyed. The mission was complete. And Sergeant Cale Morrow was still breathing. The medical bay on the orbital platform was not equipped. For human biology, the doctors had to improvise with tools designed for larger species. And they worked with a desperation born of confusion. These injuries should be fatal, the lead physician said, his 4 hands moving over Morrow's broken body. His internal organs are failing, his blood loss is catastrophic, and his cellular structure is showing signs of extreme stress. Then why is he still alive? Vethran asked. The physician studied his scans, and his face went pale. There are chemicals in his bloodstream, he said. Adrenaline and cortisol and other compounds I do not recognize. And they are present in concentrations that would kill any species I know of. He looked up at Vethran with something like wonder. His body is consuming itself to keep him alive. And it is burning through his reserves at a rate that should not be possible. And every system is operating far beyond safe parameters. A biological override, Torka said quietly. His species has a way to push past their limits and into self-destruction. The physician corrected. This is not a strength, Commander. This is controlled biological suicide. And his body is literally tearing itself apart to keep his heart beating. Vethran looked through the window at the human lying on the operating table, small and soft and broken, and somehow still fighting. Can you save him? I do not know, the physician admitted. But I am going to try. The surgery lasted 8 hours. When it was over, Morrow was alive, barely, impossibly. Stubbornly alive, Vethran sat with him in the recovery room as the human drifted in and out of consciousness when Morrow finally opened his eyes. The commander was there. Welcome back, Vethran said. Did everyone make it? Vethran looked at the floor, Torka and I, and 3 others who were evacuated before the assault. 5 survivors out of 20. Morrow closed his eyes. I am sorry, he said. You have nothing to apologize for. And you saved us all. Silence filled the room finally. Vethran asked the question that had been burning in his mind since he saw the carnage in the security hub. Why do humans fight like this? Sergeant, why do you break yourselves? Why do you refuse to stop when any sane creature would accept defeat? Morrow thought about the question for a long time. Because we remember, he said finally. Every human carries 10,000 years of survival in their bones. And we remember the ice ages and the famines and the plagues. And we remember the wars and the disasters and the times when our species almost ended. He opened his eyes and met Vethran's gaze. We are not the strongest or the fastest or the toughest. And our bodies are fragile and our lives are short. But we are still here. His voice was barely a whisper now. And we remember what it cost. 3 weeks later, the 47th Assault Division received new orders. Commander Vethran filed his mission report and included a single recommendation at the end. Request additional human attachments for all future operations. When High Command asked for justification, he submitted a 1-line response. They are what we pretend to be. The report made its way through the coalition bureaucracy and eventually reached the Office of Strategic Planning within a month. Requests for human soldiers had increased by 300% within a year. Humanity had gone from a curiosity to a cornerstone of coalition military strategy, and in the barracks of the orbital platform, the warriors of the 47th told stories about the human who had fought 12 elites alone and won. They told stories about the small soft creature who had refused to die. They told stories about the chaos he had left behind, and when new recruits asked if the stories were true, the veterans would nod and say yes, yes, all of it was true, and then they would add a warning, be glad the humans are on our side, because if they were not, nothing in the galaxy could stop them. Somewhere on Earth, in a small room in a military hospital, Sergeant Cale Morrow was learning to use his prosthetic fingers. He had been offered a medical discharge and a pension that would let him live comfortably for the rest of his life. He had refused. There were more missions to complete. There were more battles to fight. There were more aliens who needed to learn what humanity really was. He flexed his new fingers and smiled. The galaxy had no idea what was coming.